The system to observe the gates on the horizon, as described in 1 Enoch, are very real physical structures used to keep track of the biblical calendar. These 6 gates form the foundation of a timekeeping system that tracks the sun, moon, and stars to measure the seasons and sacred days. To review, over the past couple of months, we've been exploring the Enoch calendar and how it differs from the Zadok calendar in some important ways. We've looked at the gates of Enoch, the celestial doorways the sun, moon, and stars pass through, and examined how they help structure time. We also took a closer look at the stars, especially the constellation Aries, to better understand how all of these elements work together to calibrate the ancient timekeeping system described in 1 Enoch. In this video, we're gonna hone in closely on just one major piece of this intricate puzzle, the gate counting method, to locate the start of the year. Today I plan to give a step-by-step tutorial on this method so you can see how it helps determine the start of the year. There is a lot to unpack here from this one method, so instead of trying to cover multiple topics this time, we're going to keep it simple and concentrate on getting this foundational part right. Let's jump right in. I believe the best way to fully grasp later topics I plan to cover in future videos is by first understanding the gate counting method. I discovered this method by tracking the sun's positions each day and mapping out the gates of Enoch using the gate's edges. That is, beginning at the solstices on the horizon, and then counting inward from there. The solstices are the furthest points on either side of the sun's path and are considered the edges of the solar gates. The equinox also plays a crucial role in this alignment process. But before dismissing this approach, please stick with me to the end. I promise it'll make sense. Before we continue, I want to remind you, this is still a work in progress. I know I've said this before, but it bears repeating. I truly believe there's something significant here, and I'm committed to continuing the search alongside all of you. Please keep sharing your thoughts in the comments. Brainstorm with me. Build on what I've shared, just as I've built on the work of others. That's how truth is revealed, through study, collaboration, and the Spirit of God guiding His people. Now, when it comes to the gates, yes, I believe they are physical. We can observe them in the solstices, in the way that light and darkness are described as dividing over time, and the sun and moon's yearly courses within the gates. From the day after the equinox to the summer solstice, the count aligns beautifully. And from the winter solstice back to the equinox, it works again. But from the summer solstice to the winter solstice, I consistently find myself one day short. Looking out toward the horizon and measuring from the azimuth, the difference is incredibly small, just a fraction of a degree. On December 20th, we're at 117.49 degrees, and on December 21st, it shifts ever so slightly to 117.50. So I'm going to put it on screen. Did you catch that? It's subtle and almost invisible until you zoom in and examine it a little bit closer. Now that we've zoomed in, this tiny difference is what's throwing off the alignment. It doesn't seem like much, but when you're dealing with precision like this, even a fraction of a degree matters. However, this isn't failure, it's a clue, a puzzle piece. Use this as a foundation to explore further. As scholar Ratzon noted, more work is needed on the gates, and I fully agree. I believe there's still missing information out there, maybe even hidden in plain sight. But even with what we have, we can go even further. So for the sake of transparency, and in the hope that someone out there might have insight, I want to share the challenges I'm facing. When I use the gate counting method alone, I fall short by one day when trying to land perfectly on the solstice. This could be connected to the difference between a perfect 364-day year and our current 365 and a quarter day solar year. Something I believe may have shifted due to sin, as this appears to be hinted to in ancient texts, maybe after the time that Enoch wrote the luminaries. It's similar to the equilux issue. Just because we hit equal day and night doesn't always mean we've reached the correct equinox, but I still believe this can be resolved. The truth is, solving the calendar mystery is a massive undertaking, and I know I can't do it alone. That's actually why I began this whole Enoch video series, to document the journey and to invite others, my brothers and sisters in the faith, to work on this with me. These videos take a lot of time, energy, and study to produce, but I believe it's worth it. Here's what does work. When we begin at the equinox, due east, we can count one intercalated day, then follow Enoch's pattern of 30, 30, 31 days. That takes us right to the summer solstice, where Enoch describes the sun giving 15 parts of light and 9 parts of darkness. This matches certain locations across the earth, though not always in Israel. So the issue. The count of 182 days lands just one day before the solstice by modern reckoning, just a small movement off on the azimuth. But if you follow the count from that point, the pattern loops back around and brings you precisely to where we started. That doesn't mean it's wrong, it just means it's still being refined. So with that said, we'll move forward as if this is fully solved and correct, so I can show you how to track this system for yourself and visualize the path I've been working on. And you're free to build on this method and the information I put forth, or discard it altogether. So let's move away now from the disclaimer and focus back on this method. But before I outline how to map out the gates of Enoch, I want to support some of my previous claims and what I'm about to say by bringing in some scholarly work that I recently found. There's a detailed academic paper titled The Gates Cosmology of the Astronomical Book of Enoch by Eshbal Ratzon, which seems to agree with something important I've been saying on this channel. The sun's movements through the gates were mapped out as a structured, consistent system. The author explains that the sun travels through 30 or 31 subdivisions or openings within each gate, and that this path is fixed. If you alter the number of days arbitrarily at the start of the year, you're throwing off the entire calibrated system. I'll attempt to link the article below and put a few key quotes on the screen as we go, but I think it really helps validate that the Enoch calendar wasn't built to be flexible year to year, but anchored to an unchanging cycle. Equinox versus equilux. This feels like the right time to revisit a topic I covered briefly in a previous video. Is the final day of the year the equilux or the equinox? I've spent a lot of time trying to track down the date and location in Israel where day and night are exactly equal, what we call the equilux. But no matter where I look, the equilux always occurs several days before the equinox. And when you try to align that with the finely tuned system of Enoch's gates, things start to fall out of place and it just doesn't work. There's another major challenge. Enoch 72 gives us specific ratios of daylight and nighttime at the solstices, 2:1 in the summer and 1:2 in the winter. Enoch 72:13. It returns to the east and enters the sixth gate. It emerges and sets through the sixth gate for 31 days because of its sign. During that day, the daytime grows longer than the night, with the daytime being double the night. The daytime is 12 parts, while the night grows shorter and is 6 parts. Enoch 72:25. It returns to the east in the first gate for 31 mornings, and sets through the first gate in the west. On that day, the night is longer and is double the daytime. The night is 12 parts exactly, and the daytime is 6 parts. So I tried to find a location in Israel where this 2:1 and 1:2 ratio actually happens. I spent hours searching. Nothing. Now, I'm not the only one hitting this wall. In fact, I came across a scholarly article that puts this very problem into words. Here's a direct quote. Indeed, 1 Enoch 72 demonstrates the correspondence between the places from which the sun seems to rise and set and the length of day and night. This variation in the length of day and night is fairly schematic in 1 Enoch 72. The ratio between day and night is 2:1 on the summer solstice and inverse on the winter solstice. This schema does not match the true ratio in Israel. My current theory is that one of two things may have happened. Either the celestial mechanics changed, possibly due to stretching of the year from 364 days to roughly 365.25, or Enoch and other ancient observers were operating from a different latitude altogether. And no, I couldn't get the ratios to work in the locations in Africa either. My personal view? I believe this discrepancy comes from a cosmic shift. Maybe even what Enoch himself foresaw, where the original calendar is corrupted due to the sin of man, and the year expanding and the perfect symmetry of a 364-day system was thrown off. But who can say? I don't think we should stop investigating this area of scripture. There may still be other possible explanations for this out there. But all of this to say, the equinox provides a solid, unchanging, anchored point to work from. In fact, it's the reference used by many ancient cultures, and several historical documents even suggest that it was the original starting point for Israel's calendar. I dive deeper into these sources in another video if you'd like to explore that further. I also want to make a point that builds on what we just talked about. The changing lengths of day and night, and how 2 of the 4 intercalary days lands in the solstices. The sun is clearly in a specific location within the gates during the day to night ratios Enoch discusses. And these 2 extra days, one in gate 6 and one in gate 1, line up with the longest and shortest days of the year. That means the sun's position in the gates has to match a very specific time of year. So it's not just about counting days, it's about where the sun actually is. And if we add a full week, 1 year, but not the next, it throws off the timing and messes up how long the sun is supposed to be in each gate. It breaks the system Enoch describes. In the article, Ratzon explains that each gate in the Enoch calendar system is made up of smaller subdivisions referred to as inlets or openings. I envision these inlets as 30 or 31 distinct slots or grooves along the horizon, individual points through which the sun appears to rise and set each day. These inlets represent the sun's gradual day-by-day progression through each gate during its annual journey. Here's the key idea. Each gate spans 30 or 31 days, and within that gate are 30 or 31 distinct inlets, 1 inlet per day. So instead of the sun just rising through a single fixed location in a gate for an entire month, it gradually shifts through a sequence of tiny positions, inlets, within that gate over the course of the month. These inlets are like a finely tuned ruler stretched across the horizon, allowing the ancients to track the sun's daily movement with great precision. Ratzon suggests that this structure demonstrates how mathematical and intentional the calendar really was. It wasn't just based on general observations of the seasons, it was tied to predictable day-by-day progression of the sun through these inlets, which form the backbone of this gate counting system. This detail also reinforces the idea that the calendar can't be shifted around arbitrarily. If you alter the number of days or force a certain weekday start, you misalign the sun with these finely measured inlets and break the system Enoch describes. Ratzon writes that the gates themselves are based on a mathematical structure, not a flexible weekly cycle. That means any attempt to force a specific weekday, like Wednesday, every year, requires breaking the rhythm of the sun's journey, which directly contradicts the purpose of the gate system described in 1 Enoch. So instead of adjusting the calendar to match our week, the Enoch calendar forces us to realign ourselves with the natural movements of the sun, not the other way around. This part of the research really helped solidify for me that the calendar isn't meant to be tampered with year to year. It's meant to stay fixed, anchored in creation itself. Another work, Zodiac Calendars in the Dead Sea Scrolls and Their Reception, by Helen Jacobus, also strongly supports the idea that the solstices are linked to specific positions within the gates. Based on my own research, I found these solstice points to align with the edges of the gates described in Enoch. However, I would personally disagree with the idea that the moon aligns with these same gate positions each year, as my findings don't support this conclusion. We'll revisit the previous article for a few more gems after I break down how the gate counting method works. As we've learned from 1 Enoch, the beginning of the year starts within gate 4, and the days within each gate follow a very specific sequence. Gate 4, 30 days. Gate 5, 30 days. Gate 6, 31 days. 30, 30, 31, and so forth. Essentially, the sun remains in each gate for either 30 or 31 days. This is important to keep in mind as we move forward. These gates do not fluctuate or change, meaning the sun does not change its position in the gate from one year to the next year. It will always end up at the same location inside the gates that it did the year before. In my last video, we looked at historical evidence showing that the biblical calendar and many other ancient calendars began the year when the sun aligned with or just past the spring equinox, specifically within the constellation Aries. The starting point was not random. These cultures naturally viewed spring as the season of renewal and the start of the agricultural cycles. The constellation Aries has moved from this location, however, the equinox has not moved, meaning we can still view the equinox as a rough starting point for our count. So here's how we apply this. If we begin our count the day immediately after the sun aligns with the equinox, the last day of the previous year, we can insert our intercalary day right at the start of the year, something we'll refer to as the head of days. And I'll explain that title a little more in my next video. Now, this extra day and a quarter day may have been introduced as a result of sin or some cosmic shift after Enoch's time, when he recorded the correct or original structure of a 364-day year. Or it might have been a part of the design from the very beginning, and we simply lack enough inspired ancient texts to fully explain its origin or purpose. Either way, it's a real factor we have to account for if we want to keep the calendar in sync with the sun's movements through the gates. That's because I believe the calendar revolves around the sun's actual positions within the gates, and to a lesser extent, the moon. I want to emphasize this point. The Enoch calendar counts exactly 364 days in a year, which might have accurately reflected the solar year at one point in ancient times. However, today's solar year lasts 365 and a quarter day. This means we must account for this additional one day and include an extra day every 4 years. Not doing so causes the sun to migrate away from the appropriate position in the gate. Without accounting for this additional quarter day, our calendar would drift, seasons would shift, and the gates described in Enoch's text would no longer match up properly. Here's an example of how the sun falls behind as the year progresses. Every 4th year, we must add an additional day to keep the sun aligned with the gates. I plan to give an explanation for this additional day every 4th year in my next video. But for now, let's stay focused on understanding this method. Consider that the solar year has a quarter of a day each year, meaning every 4 years, or 4 quarters, we will be left with an additional day. This time within the solar year must be accounted for to keep proper alignment of Enoch's 364-day year, azimuth, and the sun's position. To accurately pinpoint the exact location of the solstice and clearly determine the sun's furthest point within our gates, gates 1 and gate 6, we're going to use what's called the azimuth calculation. The azimuth is essentially a measurement shown in degrees of a location that tells you an accurate horizontal position of an object, in our case the sun, in relation to true north. Think of it as a compass direction along the horizon, with a range of 0 to 360, with 0 being true north, 90 degrees being east, also exactly on the equinox, 180 degrees south, and 270 degrees west. By measuring the sun's azimuth at a consistent elevation on the horizon, we'll get a closer picture of exactly when and where the sun reaches its furthest points within the edges of gates 1 and 6. Which also happens to be the summer and winter solstice. We will only be using the azimuth to locate the solstices and the equinox. The winter solstice seems to occur at a consistent time and location each year. Well, at least based on what I've observed so far, using the same elevation and azimuth data up until the year 2030. I plan to continue to explore this out more or in more depth as I continue to study this out. Okay. Now that we've laid out the groundwork, let's zoom in and see how everything fits together. Once we add that one intercalary day after the spring equinox, we begin our count. And from that point, if we follow the pattern exactly as Enoch describes, we arrive right at the doorstep of the summer solstice, 92 days later. The count goes like this: 30 days, then 31. And then again, 30, 30, 31. Enoch starts this sequence from what he calls gate 4. In chapter 72, he lays out how the sun moves, beginning its path from the east. And on the equinox, the last day of this section, the sun is positioned directly due east at 90 degrees on the azimuth. Let's pull up the verses in 1 Enoch now, and I'll show you how the count unfolds through these gates. Enoch 72:6. This is how it emerges in the first month through the large gate. It emerges through that fourth one of those 6 gates on the side where the sun rises. When the sun rises in the sky, it emerges through that 4th gate for 30 mornings, and it accurately goes down in the 4th gate on the west side of the sky. 1 Enoch 72:11. The sun emerges from the 4th gate and sets through the 4th gate. It returns to the 5th gate in the east for 30 mornings, and it emerges from it and sets through the 5th gate. Enoch 72:13. And it returns to the east and enters the 6th gate. It emerges and sets through the 6th gate for 31 days because of its sign. When we begin counting for our one additional day, we find ourselves exactly at the edge of gate 6, directly at the summer solstice. From this point, the solstice, the sun pauses momentarily and then begins its return journey back through gate 6, just as Enoch explains. He describes a double passage through this gate. Month 3 marks the sun's progression towards the solstice, the point where the sun seems to stop, and month 4 is when the sun reverses direction, traveling back out of gate 6. Both of these months occur entirely within gate 6. Enoch 72:15. The sun returns to the east and enters the 6th gate. It rises from it and sets for 30 days. Month 3, the sun is 31 days through gate 6, and month 4, it's 30 days, making its way out of gate 6 in the other direction. Enoch 72:17. The sun emerges from the west from that 6th gate, goes to the east, and rises in the 5th gate for 30 mornings. It again sets in the west in the 5th western gate. Enoch 72:19. The sun emerges from the 5th gate and sets through the 5th gate in the west. It rises through the 4th gate because of its sign in the 4th gate in the east 31 mornings and sets in the west. On that day, the daytime is equal to the night. Enoch 72:21. The sun emerges from that gate and sets in the west. It returns to the east and emerges through the 3rd gate for 30 mornings and sets in the west through that gate. Enoch 72:23. The sun emerges from the 3rd gate and sets through the 3rd gate in the west. It returns to the east and emerges through the 2nd gate in the east for 30 mornings. Enoch 72:25. The sun emerges on that day from the 2nd gate and sets in the west through the 2nd gate. It returns to the east in the 1st gate for 31 mornings. Enoch 72:26. On that day, the night is longer and is double the daytime. The night is 12 parts exactly, and the daytime is 6 parts. The sun has completed the chief points of its route. It again goes about those chief points of its route and enters each gate for 30 mornings. At this point, the sun has traveled across the horizon all the way to the opposite edge, gate 1. This is also described by Enoch as being the time of year with the least amount of daylight. On the Gregorian calendar, this is around December 21st. Just as before, the sun will now enter gate 1, reach the winter solstice, its furthest point, and then begin its return journey back out again in the following month through the same gate. Enoch 72:31. On that day, the sun emerges from that gate and sets in the west. It returns on the east and rises through the 3rd gate for 31 mornings and sets on the west side of the sky. On that day, the night decreases and is 9 parts with a daytime of 9 parts. Daytime is equal to the night, and the year is exactly 364 days. For the sake of consistency and the alignment with both ancient understanding and the celestial gates we're calculating, we'll use the equinox as the 364th day, the final day in Enoch's year. This fits perfectly with our count and with what Enoch says. Daytime is equal to night, and the year is exactly 364 days. It's also a fitting conclusion to the cycle when light and darkness are balanced, marking the end of the year. Right after that balanced day, we place an additional day, a transitional, uncounted day that sits just after the equinox and right before the new year begins. Some might call it day 365, but in Enoch's system, it might not be numbered at all. Possibly just a holding day, like a pause in the sun circuit before it begins again through all the gates. Others will argue that this pause belongs in the east, while facing the tabernacle as mentioned in Psalms 19. This is something I'm still working out. But something to keep in mind as you begin mapping out the doorways or inlets of Enoch's gate system. When plotting the gates along the horizon or in the sky, you might notice what appears to be pillar-like gaps between them. These show up depending on how the gates are being visualized. Now, I personally believe the sun's path was originally mapped along the horizon, but it's important to remember that the sun actually moves at an angle across the sky, a tilted sideways path. If we adjust our mapping to reflect the sun's true elevation and angle along the ecliptic, those pillar-like gaps may disappear. In other words, the spaces you're seeing might simply be a result of plotting the gates without factoring the sun's proper altitude and tilt in its journey. Well, guys, this is the best way I can break all of this down for now. After seeing how the sun follows a precise path, spending exactly 30 or 31 days in each gate along the horizon, and how that path aligns with the solstices and equinoxes, one thing has become clear to me. You can't just shift the calendar forward by a different number of days at the start of the year to force a specific weekday, like Wednesday or Sunday. If you do that, it throws off the sun's entire alignment through the gates for that year. Or each year no longer contains 364 days. The count has to remain consistent. Otherwise, you no longer follow the pattern Enoch laid out. After carefully studying Enoch's description of the sun passing through each gate or position along the horizon, I came to a realization. Both the location and the time frame the sun spends in each gate are fixed. These paths aren't random or flexible, they're locked in by design, with the exception of a fraction of a shift due to the additional quarter day yearly, which is corrected every 4 years. Again, I'll cover that a little bit more in the following video. Some interesting information I came across in the article that I wanted to share. It mentions that the Ge'ez, or Ethiopic version of the Book of the Luminaries, differs significantly from the fragmented Aramaic scrolls found in the Qumran caves. Because the Ge'ez version was the only complete version available for a long time, and due to these textual differences, many early scholars dismissed the calendar system described in Enoch as primitive. One of the more vocal critics was, surprisingly, R.H. Charles, who referred to the 364-day calendar as, quote, stupidity. But with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Aramaic fragments of Enoch, scholars have had a major shift in perspective. These more recent findings have shown that the calendar was far more sophisticated than once believed. As a result, Charles's older translation of the Ge'ez is now considered less reliable compared to newer translations that cross-reference both the Ge'ez and the Aramaic fragments. Personally, I use the Herminia translated by George W.E. Nicholsburg and James C. Vanderkam, which is a translation that's based on the more recent discoveries. But let me know in the comments which translation of Enoch you use, or if this is your first time hearing about these differences. One other quick side note worth mentioning is the article suggests that not all the gates may be the same size. In my own research, I've noticed that gates 4 and 3 appear to be slightly larger than the other 4 gates. This actually makes sense when you consider the sun's behavior. During the time of year when the sun is positioned in these gates on the horizon, it moves faster across the sky. So the larger gate size could be a reflection of that increased solar speed during these seasons. So in the next video, I plan to dig a little deeper into the title Leaders of Days and uncover how the mysterious phrase Head of Days might be an essential clue to determining exactly when the year begins. Plus, we'll tackle the question that always pops up. Where does that extra quarter day, the reason we have leap years, fit into this calendar? I also wanted to point out that I knew suggesting an Enoch calendar outside the traditional Zadok framework would stir up some pushback. And honestly, that's understandable. On the surface, it makes a lot of sense to follow a calendar model that was observed closer to the time it was practiced in ancient Israel. But as I've tracked the gates and followed the patterns more closely, I've come to a difficult but honest conclusion. The correct calibration of the calendar might not exactly exist yet, not in a fully restored form at least. And I'm not claiming to have all the answers, but far from it. My hope is to encourage my brothers and sisters in the faith to recognize that there's still more to uncover. If we seek the Father's timing together in sincere prayer, I believe He will guide His people into greater understanding. Ultimately, I want others to take this research, test it against Scripture, and build on it, so that together we can strive towards a calendar that truly aligns with God's timing and helps us honor His appointed feast as accurately as we can.